Hi everyone, today we'll discuss several best builds in Remnant 2 that will literally carry you through the whole game. So the first build we'll talk about is a build with Archon archetype and Medic archetype, mainly with Archon Prime. Our Prime archetype is Archon because we are using this wonderful Havoc form archetype skill. It's literally doing a lot of damage and clearing big packs, trash packs, and really helps us even fighting big bosses and very tough bosses. And also we are maining Archon archetype because of the Tempest Prime perk that is automatically generates 3 mod power per second, and casting a mod increases all mod generation by 100% for 10 seconds. In Medic archetype we are using our healing shield because it's a very powerful tool to survive better, to live better, and it's also we apply not only shield to our character but also to our friends' characters, to our other teammates and friends we're playing with. And what is the most important about this skill? Why I prefer healing shield over, for example, Wellspring, because Wellspring is also very decent, very strong skill, but we need to stay in the zone. But with healing shield, we can just move away from the zone. We can just move away, and we just get the shield, and the shield just giving us a bunch of resistance. So what I'm using in terms of my set, in terms of my items, I'm using Fair Royal set. It's very decent set with a nice stats, overall stats, and also with additional resistance resistance to blight, because blight, at least in my opinion, is one of the most difficult to counter debuffs in the game. And if you want, you can also change this set to Crimson Guards. It's also a really nice set, but if you don't, it's okay. Just use Fair Royal, also very powerful set. A very powerful set with also different, very decent stats. Both the sets are really nice. Also can use community favorites setup of let me see where it is. It's Labyrinthian. Yes, Labyrinthian set with a crown of Red Prince. Also you can see really nice stats with 3 parts of Labyrinthian set and 1 part of 1 crown of Red Prince, also giving you really nice stats of fire resistance, of shock resistance, and also 13 blight resistance is also really powerful. So I can use either of these 3 sets, any of combination of the sets for all builds, for all 4 or 5 builds I will show you today. So in terms of our relic, we are using Resonating Heart with range damage because we're using the long gun. It's very vital for our builds. Skill damage because we are using our Archon skill Havoc form very often, and we are just spamming it to deal a lot of damage and to clear trash packs. And also fire rate because for some guns like Nightfall we need to counter the nerf. It's not a great nerf that happened to this gun, but still, if we need more DPS, we need more fire rate, and the higher fire rate for this gun is more DPS, and this gun is really extremely powerful. Even now after the nerf, it's still very powerful. On Nightfall, I'm using why Nightfall, because Nightfall literally putting you into Shadow Realms. That's where you're staying invisible and enemies just doing 0 damage to your character. And also it's increasing your fire rate when you're using its mod Dreadwalker, and you are getting lifesteal, 10% lifesteal. That with the high damage of this gun, you just literally saving yourself. You just regenerating your health over and over with healing shield and doing really nice amount of damage. And also to get high DPS, to reload our gun less times, to not reload our gun every 10 bullets. We're using refunders. They just refunding our ammo, and we can just reload our weapon not so often, like if you are not using this wonderful mod. On my melee I'm using World's Edge, but if you are not playing the game on high difficulty, if you didn't get World's Edge, you just can swap to another really nice options, like for example Labyrinth stuff that also increase our melee damage by 40% for 10 seconds. with Dervish, that's increasing our melee damage by 40% for 10 seconds when activating a skill, and also melee kills reduces skill cooldown by 5%. Another really nice option if you want to get additional supporting weapons that also will buff your build. Or you can also use something, for example, Dreamcatcher, also a very wonderful weapon, melee weapon. You get from Lawson, from Asylum in Lawson, and this weapon, after dealing lots of damage, and also after dealing damage with every charge attack, will release a Dream Wave and flowing towards 20 meters and returning to caster. And Dream Wave applies slow to all enemies. It's also a very nice support weapon that also helps you to stay safer and to survive better. But I really prefer this weapon, World's Edge, because it's dealing really nice amounts of damage. It's a long range weapon because it's working like that. Literally, you can see quite big range of this wave that's doing also great amount of damage. But it's okay if you don't have it. You don't need to go for high difficulty, especially if you, for example, want to farm high difficulty for guns like Starkiller. Yes, Starkiller is a nice weapon, but definitely currently I see no place for this gun in current meta in Remnant 2. Until it's buffed, or until we got some other items to work better with Starkiller, I see no place for this gun. So you definitely do not need to farm high difficulty until you just want to do this or you want achievements. So you don't have World's Edge, it's okay. Just use Spectral Blade or Labyrinth Staff or Dream Catches. It's also very powerful support guns in this game. And for trash packs, if I don't have my Archon archetype Havoc form skill, if I still have my Havoc form skill on cooldown, I'm using Enigma. That is also very powerful. And if I need to clean ads, I'm just using Enigma. You can see I'm just doing damage in a very big radius to a lot of enemies. So I can use my mods to do additional damage. It's working like Anarchy in Destiny 2. Also very powerful gun that's dealing a lot of damage. And on my guns, on Nightfall, I'm using Rufanza, as I already told you, to get my ammo back. On my World's Edge, I'm using Reinvigorate to reduce stamina cost of all charged melee attacks, and it's one of the best perks on every melee weapon, so it doesn't matter what melee weapon you are using, always use, at least in this build, always use Reinvigorate. It's very powerful mod. And in Enigma, I'm using Harmonizer, that's also increasing mod damage by 20% and also generate 25 additional mod power for stowed weapon. Also very powerful skill. Very powerful mod. And about our rotation, what we are doing, and about our jewelry, of course, about jewelry. In jewelry slots, I'm using Jezebel because it's increasing mod and skill cast speed by 35%, and casting a skill or mods also increases our overall damage by 20% for 15 seconds. And I'm using Alumni Ring, also increasing our elemental damage because we're doing elemental damage with our Havoc form skill, and also critical and weak spot hits generate 20% additional mod power because we are relying on our on our mods on Nightfall, and Nightfall is long gun, and long gun is a very easy gun to just hit and crits. And also I'm using Encrypt String that using our mods regenerates 20% of max health per 10 seconds to live better again, because it's some sort of it's really tanky build. It's really easy to play and really easy to survive, and also it can stack up to 30 seconds. And we're using Ground and Stone to increase our shock damage because our Havoc form is doing shock damage and our Enigma also doing shock damage. So what is our rotation in this build? We're proccing any skill and we're using our Nightfall to do crazy amount of damage, and we're using our mods whenever our mod is ready on Nightfall to proc it and to go into spectral form and to increase our fire rate of Enigma, or not Enigma but Nightfall. And to perhaps our trash packs coming into battlefield, we're swapping to Enigma and doing damage with Enigma. We're clearing all the trash packs, and also after that we're just coming back to our Nightfall It's not the highest DPS build, but it's very tanky build, all doing quite big amounts of damage. That's at least I have this damage enough, even on high difficulty, to melt bosses quite fast, even solo. So you don't have any problems to play these builds, and you're still doing great amount of damage. And if you need to clean big pack of trash, and also if you want to do additional damage, you can also use your Havoc skill that's also doing, you can see, very big amounts of damage. Something like you can do up to 1700 DPS with just with single skill. It's a very powerful skill. It's doing great amount of damage, and also you can use streaks and blinks with this skill. So it was first build I'm using mostly in my playtime, and another very strong build I'm using for example, when my enemies have shock resistance, or bosses have shock resistance, I'm swapping to this build. It's almost the same, but with challenger archetype, it is even more tankier with rampage skill that increases, that helps us to enter the heightened state of battle, which increases fire rate by 15%, reload speed by 25%, movement speed by 15%, and it lasts for 10 seconds. And also kills and dealing significant damage, grants one stack of rage, which increases range damage by almost 3% per stack, and upon reaching 10 stacks, Challenger goes berserk, which reloads our current firearm and doubles rampage effect for 15 seconds. Very powerful skill. Rampage is a very underrated skill. It's literally can be used through a lot of very tough situations. For example, like Red Prince, because at least for me, Red Prince, when I first met Red Prince, he was just one of the most difficult bosses for that time I was playing the game. So Rampage really helped me through this boss. And why we're maining Challenger with Engineer because of the Die Hard Prime perk. That's when we receiving fatal damage, the Challenger becomes invulnerable for 3 seconds and generates 100% of max health. So with this combination of Challenger archetype and Engineer archetype, we are getting even more tankier, and we are using, of course, heavy weapon Vulcan, because Vulcan is one of the most powerful guns in the game, and it's literally just aggro all the enemies around. So they're trying to attacking our turrets, and we're just standing and shooting all the enemies around with, again, Nightfall, with Enigma if you need to clear trash. So it's basically just the same build. In terms of everything, we've just swapped our archetypes just to become even more tankier. So how does it work? I'm proccing my turrets. Let me proc it here to do even more damage, and we start doing damage with our Nightfall. Let me proc our Rampage, and now we're doing damage. Simply doing damage, everything works the same. We're proccing our mods, we're proccing our skills, and we're doing damage. Whenever our mod is ready on Nightfall, we're doing damage with Nightfall. You can see we're doing even more damage, and we're even more tankier. So yes, Archon archetype is very strong, but with these builds we're even more tankier, we're doing more damage with a very powerful combination of both survivability and our overall damage output. So very nice, very strong builds. Definitely use it whenever you on the really hard bosses, like for example the last boss of the main game. In other builds, also I'm using when I need, when I, for example, tired of Nightfall, or for example when I want to do even more damage. I'm using also, it's completely the same setup with everything the same, but I just swapping. Only one thing that is changed between these two builds, the first build and the second build I showed you. The only thing we changed in terms of our build is generally we changed several rings. We changed, to say precisely, we changed one ring. And so let's talk about rings. I will show you everything. We changed our grounding stone. When we are using Enigma, we are using grounding stone because quite obvious, Enigma doing a lot of damage, and to increase this damage, you need something that increasing your shock damage. And if you want to swap from Enigma to something else, for example, if enemies have shock resistance, you just swap into this build. When you change only two things, I'm changing my Enigma to MP60R. It's a very powerful handgun. By the way, it's SMG, but in this game it's called handgun. We are using Witchfire, it's also doing additional fire damage, and we are using Slayer, that's reload increases the damage of this weapon next shot by 20%, and also increases reload speed by 15%. Very powerful, very strong gun with very nice mods. And also we're using XMG57 bone saw, a very wonderful long gun. By the way, it's LMG. Again, this game it's called long gun, that is doing crazy amounts of damage, especially with hotshot and battery, because it's so easy with this gun. It's very stable with a very high accuracy and handling. It's very easy to hit weak spots, and increases we're using battery because battery increases our weak spot damage by 20% for every 400 mods power spent by the attached weapons mod, and it's stacked up to 3 times and lasts 10 seconds. And also at max stacks, we gain 10% critical chance on weak spot hits. And so it's basically what we've changed in this setup from the previous setup. We just changed these 2 guns and mods on these guns, and we are using our Shard Bandit rings. It increases our mod damage even further by 12%. So it's basically everything the same. Our Challenger archetype, Prime archetype, our Engineer second archetype, and Fair Royal or Crimson Guard sets with Resonating Heart, with Bonesaw, with Impy 60R, with Witchfire and Slayer, and with Shard Bandit ring, with Encrypted ring, with Fair Sigil, and Alumni ring, and Jester's Bell. So how does this build work? How does this particular build works? Again, we are proccing our turret. Let me proc it here to do even more damage. And now I'm using my Bulwark. I'm proccing Bulwark to proc our Jewelry, and I'm doing damage with our weapon. So you can see we're doing also great amount of damage. Now I'm charging my mod, and now I'm doing fiery damage with my mod on my LMG. And whenever I need to clean trash packs, I'm just swapping to my SMG, and I'm using Witchfire. It's also very powerful, very powerful mod, also dealing quite big amounts of damage. So you can see it's quite easy with this setup to hit crit spots. It's not a big deal at all, and we're also doing big amounts of damage. But previous setup I showed you, it's doing much bigger damage, something like 500 more damage setup with Nightfall. But if we have enemies that if you fight an enemy that has shock resistance, you better swap to this loadout I'm showing you currently. And to stack even more fire damage, we're using two weapons that doing fire damage. So next setup I want to show you a very nice setup that also helps you to survive even better. It's some sort of it's combination of the first setup with a ESO-like Sork-like streak. So what this setup about? What changed in this setup? Everything pretty the same like it was in the first setup with our Archon archetype and Medic archetype, with again Resonating Heart, Nightfall, Enigma, World's Edge. What changed in this build? Changed our jewelry. We changed everything to Full Moon Circles and to Ring of Omens. And also we're using generating builds, generating bands, Zohi ring and provisioner ring. Why I changed jewelry in this build, in this particular setup, to get this very powerful streak that's also helping us a lot. But be careful with this setup, because yes, you got this really powerful streak. But this streak with ring, you get the streak from 2 items, 2 Ayesha items, Full Moon Circlet plus Ring of Moments. These 2 items together, they're giving you the streak. But be careful, because with this setup, awaits costs 13% of max health, as gray health instead of stamina. So you're spending you're just making your main health bar, turning your health bar into gray health bar. So be careful with this setup, because you can just very easy, very fast lose all your health. So it's a very fun build to play, very strong build to play. But for this build you need particular food. And what I'm using with this build is Dark Fluid. It increases distance of AoE weight and combat slide by 15% and reduces the cost by 20%, and it lasts as every other food, as every other concoction for 2 hours. So how it's working, I'm just using my food, and now you can see that evade costs now not 13% but 11% of our max health, so it's much less punishing. So we can use this very powerful, very strong evade with particularly everything the same. And to live better in this setup, we're again using Nightfall that's regenerating our health, and we're using, you remember, we're using our healing shield and giving us very powerful shield. And we're using Generating Band to generate 3% of max health per second while shield is active. And also Zohi Ring that also increase our mod duration, because our mods are very powerful, like for example mods on our Nightfall, and Enigma the same. And Provisional Ring for our firearms reloads over time, while Stones again just to have less problems with Nightfall. And also you can use some hearts that's also giving you shields. Giving you shields and not health to get even, like for example Shielded Heart that grants a shield for 100% of max health and lasts 20 seconds or until shield is removed by damage. You can use this heart and not resonated hearts to work even better with Generated Band, but I'm personally using resonated heart because I really like using something like resonated heart that generates just more than half of my health over 5 seconds, and also when heal ends and any overhealed health is doubled and awarded for the next 20 seconds. I really like this bonus because it's a very powerful bonus for our builds, and it's a really strong and underrated relic. But you can always use something like Shielded Heart for this particular setup with this 2 pieces jewelry with Full Moon Circlet and Ring of Moments, and especially with Generated Band to get shields over and over with Healing Shield and with Shielded Heart. And it's working pretty the same. As I already told you, it's working the same because almost everything's the same. We just changed several skills, so basically it's everything the same with a great amount of damage. Very tanky builds up, very tanky loadout. It's also doing really nice amount of damage. So you will have no problems just proccing everything. Just use your skills, so use your relics, use your Nightfall whenever you need to fight bosses, hit crit spots, use your mods whenever you are ready, and also when you see trash bags, use your Enigma, proc Enigma mods, also very powerful. Again, working as Anarchy, you understand what it is if you play Destiny 2. And yeah, it's pretty everything. And now the last 2 setups I want to show you. It's one setup, but I have several loadouts because of the different stylish adjustments to my mods, to my setups. So what we're using brand new archetype or subclass from brand new DLC, Awakened King. And what I'm using in this setup, I'm using Miasma in Ritualist archetype. It's a very powerful skill that casts an AoE burst that applies Bleeding, Burning, Overload, and Corroded to all enemies within 22 meters and dealing a total of 6,000 base damage, and it lasts for 40 seconds. And I'm using my Invader archetype with the Void's Clog. It's also very powerful and helps you to just simply avoid all the damage for several times, for several hits. It's a very powerful skill with a very high recharge of 1 minute, and you can even low down its recharge time. So what I'm using here on my, again, I'm using my, as my relic, I'm using Resonating Heart with range damage, skill damage, and fire rates, again, for the same reason, because we're using a Nightfall that is doing fire rates, that is doing range damage, and skill damage because we're using our Miasma. It's a skill, quite obvious, right? And our increasing fire rates to do more damage with Nightfall, because Nightfall is our main weapon. And in terms of our jewelry, I'm using full moon circlet that's with which range damage life steals 3% base damage dealt, and at full health range damage is increased by 20%, and it's quite easy to stay at full health with Void's Cloak archetype skill. And I'm using a honey crystal dealing 5% additional damage for each unique status effect the target is suffering from, because we are putting a lot of different status effects from Miasma skill. And I'm using Firing Sigil again because critical and weak spot hits are really easy with Nightfall, and it generates 10% additional mod power. And again, Encrypt String, using a mod generates 20% of max health over 10 seconds and can stack up to 30 seconds. Also very powerful ring just to stay alive and just to generate a health. Quite easy to do with our setup. And on my in my last slot, I'm using Time Skipper Jewel, increases duration of all status effects applied by the wearer, and duration varies per status. And we have all the statuses, so we just extended the duration of every statuses in our build. So what I'm using here, again, I'm using the World's Edge with all the same mods, and Nightfall with the same Refunder mods. And what I'm using in my last slot, I'm using Corrupted Meridian from limited time events in Remnants. Basically, Gunfire Games just re-rolling this gun. So if you miss this gun, you can just this gun from Sewer's public event in Lossum, and you can get upgraded corrupted version of this gun from our vendor in block 13. Here you can buy this gun when event starts, and basically they just re-rolling these events all over and over. So you can, if you miss this gun, it's not a big deal, because you can just simply wait for this gun coming back and you will buy it. There is no FOMO in this game, like for example in Destiny 2. And I'm using Corrupted Meridian. That's also very powerful to clean ads. Here I'm using Harmonize, increases mod damage by 20% and also generating 25 additional mod power for stowed weapons. Stowed weapon, I mean our Nightfall. And how it's working, it's this gun, again, it's the same builds, working pretty the same. We are proccing our Miasma, we are using our Nightfall. You can see we're doing a lot of damage with a lot of passives and mods. And again, we're waiting for our mods. We're proccing our mods whenever it's ready. We're surviving all incoming damage because of the Nightfall mods, very powerful mods. And when we need to clean trash, we are swapping to our grenade launcher, and we are doing also, you can see, quite big amounts of damage, really nice damage. It's also doing very nice amounts of damage. So also really nice setup. It's also really easy to play, really fun to play, really strong to play. And now the last setup, one of the strongest setups in the game currently, also with the new with the last archetype that was added in the game. Again, it's Ritualist. What we're using here, we're using again Miasma. We're using Fey Royal or Crimson Guard sets, and we're using either Resonating Heart, but this time with elemental damage, ranged damage, and fire rates, or we're swapping to, let me see where it is. We're using, again, you can use something like Tranquil Heart with the same perks, with the same mods I'm using on Resonating Heart. Tranquil Heart, it's also a very strong option here that passively grants 2 health regeneration per second, and on use it doubles all health regeneration for 15 seconds. Not only this regeneration from hard, but all your health regeneration from all your skills and jewelry on your character. So what we are using in this setup, we are using again Resonating Hearts or Tranquil Hearts. We are using again our Bone Sword to do more status effects with our Hotshot mod, doing fire damage and burning our enemies. We are using Fated Wounds to increase critical chance of this weapon by 5% for per any unique negative status effect on the enemy, because we're doing a lot of negative effects on our enemy. We're using our Krell X, also charging to that's doing a lot of shock damage when we're throwing this X, when we're charged to throw this X, and we're using Tainting Blade mod on this X to increase our melee damage by 10% even further on corroded enemies, and also we're using Nebula handgun. Nebula pistol is it's also doing corrosive damage and doing a lot of corrosive damage with its mod, with its gun by itself. And we're using quite obvious Maelstrom that increases this weapon elemental damage by 10% for each unique elemental status on the target. Very powerful build, very strong build, and in just a second I will show you how it's working. And in terms of our jewelry, we're using Effluvium Enchanter that's also increasing acid damage by 20% and corrosive damage by 50%. That's buffing our Nebula damage and, by the way, corroded damage from Miasma archetype. Our Ahani Crystal that deals 5% additional damage for each unique status effect the target is suffering from. We're using very powerful Red Ring of Death that duplicates the last damaging negative status applied to target and also reduces outgoing status effect damage by 10%, but 10% it's nothing it's in terms of our build, because we're doing so much corrosive damage, and almost all the time our last dealt damage is corrosive, corroded and exit damage, and because we're buffing it with pretty everything with our mods on our weapons and with our amulets, it's not a big deal to lose this 10%, because it just duplicates our effect, and 10% lose is just nothing. You just see nothing. You just lose almost nothing and just feel nothing with this 10% lose. And also we're using our encrypted ring to use a mod to generate 20% of max health to again live better with our setup. And also we're using Time Skipper Jewel to increase duration of all status effects applied by the wearer, and duration will rise per status. And for our second archetype, we are using again Void Cloak in Invader archetype, because it's a very powerful, extremely powerful archetype skills that again helping us to evade pretty everything. In terms of our foods, we're using in this setup, I prefer using Dark Cedar, because it increases our health by a little percent, but still it's a very strong food. It increases not only only our health, but also increasing our stamina by 66%, and also it's increasing our movement speeds, and in this build it's really helping us to survive. So in every setup I'm using Dark Cedar, in every setup except of our setup with our Blink. You remember it was this setup with Full Moon Circlets and Ring of Omens. So in every other I'm using Dark Cedar, and it's a small buff, but still it's very strong, small but very strong buff. And now about our rotation in the setup, what we are using. Again, you remember we are proccing our Miasma, we are using our hand cannon that dealing a lot of damage, and you can see we're doing just great amounts of damage. We're swapping to our LMG, we are proccing our mod whenever it's ready to do even more damage with our LMG, and yeah, here it is, pretty everything. We are using our both weapons, we are proccing everything on both weapons to do great amounts of damage. Whenever we need to survive, we are using our Invader skill. And it's pretty easy to play pretty big amounts of damage in our setup. And in terms of our Traits, what we are using in our traits. You don't need everything. I'm just farmed everything because I'm playing this game quite a lot, and you can just, especially if you're playing with your friends, you can just get additional trait points in their world. So what we definitely need for every setup I showed you, you definitely need affliction because it's a very powerful status effect buff. You need additional ammo reserves. You need flash caster because increasing our mod and skill casting speed by 50%. It's a very strong trait. We need fortify, quite obvious because it's armor effectiveness. We don't need kinship because especially if you are playing solo, you don't need the skill this trait at all. But it's definitely worth it if you are playing in group because it's friendly fire damage reduces. Reducing long shots. We need this, of course, potency, increased consumable duration. Also very nice thing because consumables, it's all consumables we're using. It's a very powerful skill. We need regrowth. We also need because it's health regeneration by. It looks like it's a little percent, only 1.5, but still it's a very strong thing. And we don't need strong back because we are using medium armor and swiftness. Yes, it's the thing we need. Increase all movement speed by 15%. 3H, we need this because increased healing by 15%, and we are using, for example, our encrypt string that regenerates our health from using emotes. Also very powerful skill, very powerful trait that's buffing it even further. Untouchable, quite obvious because it increases evade window, vigor, endurance. It's everything we need. I'm just saying everything we need. Spirits. Again, expertise because it reduces our skill cooldown. It's very vital for all our builds. All the setups I showed you. Scholar is not something we need. Amplitude, definitely you need this because it's again AoE size for miasma. It's very vital. Arcane strike, again, something very useful because it increases mod power generation from melee damage by 50%. Bark skin reduces incoming damage, also very crucial for our builds, every build and in every playstyle we're playing. Blood bonds, not something you need because we're not playing summons, so definitely you skip this. Dark Pact, you need this. Handling, by the way, it's a flex spot. You can just save your trade points and to use something more useful. But if you still have some free trade points, so definitely use handling. It's very strong thing, especially for some things like bones or for our MP60R SMG. It's pretty shiny. It can shine if you're using some low handling, low accuracy, low handling guns. And fitness, of course, we are using this. Footwork, we need this. Recovery, we need. And also what we need is Siphoner. And we don't need Revivalist, especially if we are playing solo. We don't need Rugged because we're not playing summons. And we don't need Wayfarer because it's a nice trait if you're speedrunning and farming some rerolled worlds, but it's not crucial for our builds. So what we need, again, we need affliction, we need ammo reserves, we need flash caster, we need fortify, we need a long shot, we need potency, regrowth, swiftness, our 3H, one of the most powerful traits we need for our builds. Untouchable, of course, because CH window, it helps you just not get any damage. We need vigor, endurance, sprint, expertise, amplitude, arcane strike, bark skin. One of the most important things, bark skin, because it reduces all incoming damage by 10%. Dark pact. Handling, it's a flex spot, but you can learn this. Fitness for sure, footwork, recovery, and also Siphoner. And maybe if you are playing in a group, Revivalist, if you are playing with some friends, especially new friends who are dying a lot, so if you are playing If you are playing some really tough bosses, like for example last boss in a group, and you need to be revived, it's very strong. You definitely need this for example last boss if you're playing in group. But if you are playing solo, you definitely do not need revival list. And in terms of our consumables, what we're using as consumables, I'm using mainly my again, I'm using Dark Cedar for almost every setup, and I'm using again ammo box. You definitely need ammo box because you will lack of ammo for some bosses in this game. You can use confidence boosted, reducing incoming damage by 10% and stagger by 1 and last for 40 seconds. Very powerful and consumable. Also can use root water that generates health per second, almost 1 health per second, and lasts for 2 hours. Again, if you're struggling in some ways, you can just swap Dark Cedar to Roots Water, but I prefer Dark Cedar because it's giving you not only health increase and stamina increase, but also movement speed increase. But definitely you can use Roots Water if you want. Also, I'm using Confidence Booster, I'm using ammo box on my on my quick bar, and also I'm using my pipe bomb because it's also doing another damage. It does another status damage, especially for the last build. It's a very powerful thing because when thrown, this grenade explodes in quite big radius, 6-meter radius, and doing 450 damage, and applying bleeding status effects, also doing almost 5,000 damage over 2 minutes. Also very powerful thing. So it's pretty everything. Again, with the last setup, it's maybe the most complicated setup to play with because you need to play rotation, but when you play this rotation, it's definitely not a big deal. You're just using miasma again, you are just using your SMG, you are proccing SMG mods, doing this really nice amount of damage. And whenever it's ready, you are just swapping to your LMG. Whenever mod on your LMG is ready, you are proccing LMG to do this damage. You can see how much damage I'm doing with the last setup. And again, I'm shooting SMG, I'm shooting LMG, proccing all the mods, proccing my skills. So not a difficult setup to play, but you can even you can just raise your damage up to 2000 DPS. You can see now I'm doing literally crazy amounts of damage. Even so, you can even raise your damage to something like 2050 if you are if you have if you are proccing everything with if you can proccing everything and not keeping anything on cooldown, just whenever it's ready, you're just proccing and doing damage. So it's really easy to play with the setup. Every setup is very strong and will literally, as already told you, carry you through a lot of different activities. And it is, again, every setup is very powerful, and they're not only DPS centered. Every setup is some sort of tanky, so you can with every setup survive almost everything in this game with not a big issue even on the last boss, and not suffering on the last boss for too long. And also you're doing, especially with the first setup and the last setups, you are doing crazy amounts of damage and you're just melting all the bosses in the game. So if you want, guys, more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more builds and guides on different games, and if you want different endgame explained in different games. So yeah, don't forget, and I will see you in the next video. Good luck.